So my name is John, and I want to tell you a story. There was a time in my life where I used to curse the Almighty. Why, I would say, I would ask, why me, of all people? A former therapist used to explain it. Well, John, it's a nexus of heredity and the external conditions of your life. Then she said, you see, your genetics loads the gun, and the environment pulls the trigger. Okay. She pantomimed the shape of a pistol and aimed it towards the wall. In therapy. So I go, great, nothing like a violent firearm metaphor. For my crazy shrink to calm me down, my crazy New York shrink, to calm me down and soothe my anxiety. Thanks, Dr. Wachtel. The thing is, if you ever suffered from extreme anxiety and chronic panic attacks, there are times when you do in fact wish someone would euthanize you with a swift gunshot to the head. No pun intended, but in the moment, it's a no-brainer. As early as 8 years old, I knew I was a different kind of child. I wanted to fit in like everybody else, but no matter how hard I tried, I felt estranged from others as a result of my paralyzing anxiety. Everyone looked so relaxed all the time, happy. The worst part of it was no one could understand, least of all my parents. I suffered my first panic attack one night after my parents went to bed, which is usually when it happened. Out of nowhere, this terrifying current of fear surged through my body like a demonic possession. My heart thumped out of control, I gasped for air. I began to sweat, and my mind raced uncontrollably. People with panic disorder know what I'm talking about. In a frantic state, I ran into my parents' bedroom, and I woke up my mother, not knowing what was happening to me. She lifted her head from the pillow and in a drowsy tone whispered to me that I should be careful not to wake up my father. We both knew that was a really bad idea. Then she murmured, "Go back to bed, John, go back to bed, nothing to be afraid of." My mother was very kind and she did the best that she could. So I went back to bed as she instructed and hoped she was right. For a moment, I believed her without question. She was my mom. However, the panic continued. It was the first of many dark and lonely nights to come. For the next 4 years, my panic attacks continued, however. I understood that something was really amiss with me. If there was nothing to be afraid of, as my mother insisted, yet I continued to be afraid, something was seriously wrong with me. I remember thinking I must be stupid or I must be weak if I'm scared of nothing. There was no identifiable source of fear that I could verbalize to my parents. No monsters under the bed, no boogeyman in the closet. There was simply no reason to be that frightened, yet the fear persisted. So the die was cast. At that age, it was written in stone. I wasn't just a boy growing up as an equal member of the human race. No, I was a freak. I was a pathetic, terrified little carrot who was slowly losing his mind. This belief set up a template of shame and self-loathing that lasted for years, long years. I later learned that a lot of what my therapist told me was actually true. There was no chicken, there was no egg. It was instead a confluence of influence. My genetics had loaded the gun, with the bullets that predisposed me to anxiety. My inborn susceptibility for angst had wired me for a childhood of fear and emotional reactivity. Apparently, I thought, when I was being created at the assembly line, God forgot to put in the shock absorbers. I also learned that growing up with my critical father may have been the trigger of that very same gun. My father was a Greek immigrant who came to the United States in the early 1950s. He fought in World War II, almost died of pneumonia, suffered hard economic times, and yet still managed to raise a family and create a successful business in New York with no formal education. Sorry, my mouth is dry. He was a cold pillar of unflinching strength and sheer doggedness. See, just talking about him and my mouth gets dry. There was nothing soft about my father, nothing. He was old school, strict, and brutally harsh. Seeking comfort from him was like trying to buy milk at a hardware store. As a little boy, if I displayed any sign of my chronic fear, he battered me with shame. My poor father didn't know any better. Where he came from, there was no such thing as anxiety or depression. He was particularly incensed with my intermittent panic attacks, which he could never understand. "Stop these right now," he would bark at me with his heavy accent. He loathed the fact that a reflection of him, his own son, could succumb to such weakness. Then within inches in my face, he would shout, "When I was your age, I had to work 3 jobs to support the family. I had no time to be afraid." But all stories have a silver lining, even this one. The reality is if it wasn't for my pre-wiring and genetic inclination for anxiety, and if not for my father's abusive treatment, I would never have landed my ass in therapy. I'm pretty sure that if not for my anxiety and my father's reaction, I would never have sought higher education and become a psychotherapist. Today and for the last 23 years, I have treated hundreds of patients suffering from a range of mental health conditions, especially extreme cases of phobias, OCD, and panic attacks. I have also written and published 2 books on the same subject. So, if you take anything away from my story today, write this down. Remember that, 1, the only normal people in the world are people you don't know very well. 2, keep in mind that dentists get cavities. Auto mechanics' cars break down. And bankers go bankrupt. Did you hear that? Bankers go bankrupt. 3, if you are currently suffering from a mental health condition and you are getting help, remember that this too shall pass. It'll pass like a kidney stone. But it will pass. Promise you. And lastly, most importantly, don't forget that no matter what happens to you in this life, regardless of your diagnosis, the only person you are destined to become is the person you decide to be. I decided not to let my affliction rule my life. Today, I don't ask why me anymore. I instead confidently say, why not me? And wherever you are, Dad, the many people I have helped, and even I, say thank you for pulling the trigger. This is my brave.